Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. Pakistan has waived the passport requirement for Sikh pilgrims entering the country on the 550th birth anniversary of Baba Guru Nanak. During his weekly press briefing, Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Dr. Mohammad Faisal said the government has waived three requirements for Sikh pilgrims coming to Kartarpur Sahib on Baba Guru Nanak's birth anniversary. The pilgrims will no longer have to carry their passports or convey their information to the government and register 10 days in advance. He also said that the $20 service charge per pilgrim per visit on November 9 and 12 will also be waived. He said this information had been formally conveyed to the Indian government. However, an ISPR statement on Wednesday said that the entry will be permit-based, citing security reasons. The Kartarpur Sahib initiative was taken by Pakistan on the day Prime Minister Imran Khan took oath of office. The initiative was unilateral and meant to enable the Sikh community in India and around the world to visit one of their holiest places. Meanwhile, in sharp contrast to Kartarpur, Ayodhya and its twin city Faizabad in the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh are in a state of heightened anxiety as they await the verdict of the country's top court in a 70-year-old legal dispute over land Muslims and Hindus both claim as theirs. The Supreme Court, which concluded its hearings in the case last month, will decide by mid-November whether a Hindu temple should be built in place of the medieval-era Babri Mosque, which was demolished by Hindu mobs in 1992. To discuss the two stories, starting with Kartarpur Sahib, we have with us Manpreet Singh, who is the General Secretary of World Sikh Parliament, joins us from Derby in the UK. We also have Mr. Ravi Srivastav, who is an analyst based in Mumbai. And we have Hassan Akbar, who is Director of Programs at Jinnah Institute and has supervised several Track 2 programs and also research studies on democracy, governance, etc., and including poverty alleviation. So thank you to the entire panel. Let me begin with Mr. Singh on this. Mr. Singh, when this initiative was taken by Pakistan, and Mr. Sidhu was informed of this when he went back to India, he was attacked viciously by various other leaders. But finally, Delhi came round to discussing the issue with Pakistan, and we now have a deal. I think it's a great moment for the Sikh community. What are your thoughts about
it? Thanks a lot for having me, first of all. I am obviously, being a Sikh, overwhelmed by the support and by the whole thing that Pakistan has done for Sikhs, especially on the 550th anniversary of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Prakash Purab. Obviously, we as Sikhs from last 70 years, since the Pakistan-India got divided, we always wanted to, and this was part of our daily prayer as well, which we do 2 times a day, morning and evening, that we need to get the blessed vision of these holy places who belong to Sikhism. Obviously, being the conditions between India and Pakistan for the last 70 years, they've always been in a state of war or Cold War, always. So obviously, Sikh shrines and for Sikhs visiting these shrines, it was always jeopardized by one or the other incident. But since Imran Khan has taken over the Pakistani government, I think it's commendable the way he has articulated himself as to how he wants world peace and what's his formula for doing that. And especially for what he's done for the Sikhs, especially with this Kartarpur Corridor, is absolutely commendable. But at the same time, we are, as a Sikh community, we are closely watching what India has done as well. Now, with Pakistan, it is World Sikh Parliament delegation who requested about 3 weeks ago to waive off the fees and then so many other things, waive off the passport requirement and everything. And Pakistan has unconditionally agreed on these things single-handedly. But now, as we see with India, India is not allowing people without the passports to actually go to Pakistan. They're their own citizens. Now, obviously, being Sikh community nearly 2% in India, India has its own responsibility towards Sikhs as well, especially on this special occasion. But what we are seeing What we are seeing from the media, as you mentioned about Mr. Sidhu has obviously played a vital role in convincing Mr. Imran Khan to unilaterally decide on this issue and to open it for the Sikh pilgrimage to get the blessed visions of these holy sites. But what India has done, India criticized Sidhu, as you mentioned, but what they are doing at a diplomatic front is even disheartening. At the same time, when Imran Khan wins Sikh communities' hearts and mind and souls, at the same time, India is disappointing us again and again. If we see their media coverage, it's full of false news, fake news against whatever initiative Imran Khan is taking. They're saying they're going to flag up Sikh separatism, stuff like that. And this is just so petty. On this particular occasion of Sikhism, when they are commemorating the 550th Gurpurab of their founder, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, all these type of things are again reminding us of the human right violation that has been done to us Sikh community in India, whether it be 1978, 1984, so on and so forth, till on today. We are sick and tired of India's attitude towards our community, but at the same time, as I said earlier, all as a World Sikh Parliament, we obviously commemorate and we obviously respect the way Imran Khan has conducted himself on the Kartarpur Corridor issue.
Mr. Singh, stay with me. Let me go to Mr. Srivastav here. Mr. Srivastav, one of the things about the Kartarpur Sahib, the unilateral decision that Pakistan took, and then, of course, India came along, this, despite all the tensions and including the military round that was played between India and Pakistan, Pakistan stuck to this and it did not allow this to derail. Now, give me a sense of why the two countries, in this particular case, frankly, the cussedness is on the Indian side. Actually, as far as the religious aspirations of the people are concerned, as far as people-to-people contact is concerned, perhaps somehow we have to divorce these from the general, geopolitical sort of rivalries and adversarial framework that we have witnessed between India and Pakistan over the past 70 years.
Ejaz, first of all, I would like to congratulate entire Sikh community across the world on this 550th commemoration of Prakash Parv of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And it's a wonderful thing which happened between these two warring countries in the last so many years. You are well aware that this Kartarpur Sahib issue has been going on for more than last 20 years and nothing was happening. No government was taking any initiative to make it or to start it. I would call Navjot Singh Sidhu an architect of this particular event, what has culminated today with the help of Honorable Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shri Imran Khan, and the government of India. Both have come forward, both have shaken hands, and both have started it. I may not agree with the Shri Manpreet Singh ji that there are any kind of atrocities happening on Sikhs in India, leaving aside that 1978 and 1984, something which unfortunate had happened. But as of now, since last 35 years, I can say for sure, being a resident of India, that Sikhs are as equal as any other citizen in this country. And they are enjoying all kind of privileges which any Indian should get it. So there is nothing like that. As far as the social media, the fake news is concerned, the social media is full of such things. It happens in UK also, it happens in USA also. But by and large, people do not trust them and people go verify it and act upon it. It's a very indeed magnanimous on the part of Shri Imran Khan to allow these two things for without passport and waiving off his fee of that $20 or whatever was decided. It's a wonderful gesture. I would appreciate if Mr. Imran Khan does it for the entire this kind of visit of the pilgrims to that Kartarpur Sahib. That would be a wonderful thing. That will be a wonderful gesture. I hope that Shri Imran Khan extends it for a longer time so that people can go and visit it. See, borders are made by humans. Yeah, please, Ejaz.
Mr. Srivastav, stay with me. I will come back to you. I just go to Hassan Akbar and then back to Mr. Singh. Hassan, what are your thoughts about this? Clearly, there was a long process which has finally culminated positively, and we are all very happy that Sikhs within Pakistan, in India and elsewhere around the world can actually come and visit one of their, as I said, holiest places. That is the desire of anyone with any kind of religious affiliation. How much do you think, I mean, in terms of the Indian approach to the issue after Pakistan took the initiative? Just walk us through that, because I think that recap is important.
Thank you, Ejaz. I think, as you said, rightfully so, that it's very important. I think it's the right of every religious community to visit their most holiest shrine. It's very important, and I'm very happy that the Sikh community has gotten the chance finally after many years to come and freely visit Kartarpur Sahib. It's an excellent initiative. As was earlier mentioned, it's been 2 decades since Kartarpur was on the table in terms of discussions between India and Pakistan, but it really never took off. I think one of the reasons was because of the tense situation between both the countries. But this last year, we have seen unprecedented progress. And I would like to credit Pakistan, not because I'm sitting in Islamabad, but because I really do feel that Pakistan has gone out of its way when it came to Kartarpur Sahib to open up a corridor. Let's not forget that for 2 countries that have been engaged recently in frankly, such animosity and almost, a conflict, within the year, to be able to continue this process, I think gives credit to the disposition in Islamabad that they've stuck to their position on opening up the Kartarpur Sahib corridor. They have gone out of their way in terms of, making sure finances are there, making sure that all kinds of facilities are provided to pilgrims. But India's response from the beginning, on the day that on the opening ceremony, when Imran Khan was being sworn in, the news came out that the Kartarpur Sahib corridor offer had been made from Pakistan in the meeting with Navjot Singh Sidhu. Since then, there has been a number of concerns from Delhi, and the reading has been that they have been, even today, they are reluctant. They have had to open the corridor because of the strong Sikh sentiment, which obviously favored opening up the corridor. But as a government, I think Modi and his inner circle has been very reluctant. Initially, there was talk about, a process. They said that, how will we complete the processes? They also have raised a certain specter about, you must have seen recent stories about how, terrorism is being used, etc. There are camps that have moved near Shakargarh and Narowal, and these are all false stories that are being put in the press in India. And I think that they only go to vitiate the atmosphere, which can be a very positive atmosphere. We've also seen concerns from India about, the Khalistan movement. A positive offer like this that Pakistan has made and worked on in the last 1 year has constantly been branded in India as a move to promote Khalistani pro-independence movement by Pakistan. But the process is very simple. People who come from India will be able to visit the Gurdwara. All kinds of people, Sikhs, will be allowed to come in. They, I'm sure, will send their own people to make sure that, interactions are limited, etc. It'll be a day trip. I don't think that there should be any concerns of security from the Indian point of view.
Absolutely.
Pakistan has been very sensitive to it.
Let me go back to Mrs. on this. Mr. Singh, 2 things, and Mr. Srivastav, obviously, he's been on my program before. He's a secular intellectual who believes in inclusiveness. But what we are witnessing under the BJP government which has a very heavy RSS footprint there, is a certain kind of approach towards minorities. And obviously, Sikhs are also a minority in India. We've seen what they've done in occupied Kashmir, which is, of course, another issue that's ongoing up until now. The whole idea, Pakistan was constantly trying to say this, and Mr. Sidhu was also making this argument that, for heaven's sake, don't make it about politics. This is about the Sikh religious sentiment. Let's just look at it from that perspective. But as Hassan pointed out, there were these really amazing stories in the Indian media about so-called terrorist camps being moved near Shakargarh and all of that. What do you make of this? I mean, a simple thing has been turned into an extremely complicated issue.
100%. I mean, there is no two ways about it how India has been operating. Obviously, as a mere spectator, I have seen a lot of false flag programs from India earlier on to jeopardize any such peace movements going on within the South Asian corridor. Now, we know for a fact how crucial this is for Sikh sentiments, as you mentioned earlier. Now, with this movement, the way India has reacted, as I articulated before, it is actually heartbreaking. If they consider us as equal citizens, which I am convinced as a Sikh they don't, because what has happened in 1984, we cannot forget that. It was a pre-planned, government-planned genocide. India has still not agreed to take on that responsibility and even say sorry for that, which is absolutely atrocious. What has happened in Punjab in the time of insurgency between 1984 to late 1990s, our children have been killed. Nearly about 100,000 Sikhs have lost their life. The least they could have done for us was to actually have no stones in the way of this corridor program.
Mr. Singh, I get your point. Mr. Srivastav also wants to say something. Go ahead, Mr. Srivastav.
Ejaz, I just want to correct Mr. Manpreet Singh that none other than India's Prime Minister Sardar Manmohan Singh ji on the floor of the Parliament apologized for that genocide happened in 1984, and the particular ruling party, the Congress, has not once at several occasions expressed their regret, and the law is taking its course. I hope he is aware that the people who were involved with that massacre, they are being booked, they are being sent to jail, and things are happening. Yes, I admit that it's taken a long time of 35 years, but that does happen. Yeah.
Okay, let me get Mr. Singh's view.
I take that comment on board, right? Okay. When you're saying India has officially, give me a single statement from the whole house when India has first thing committed to this, that this was a genocide. They still refer this to as a 1984 anti-Sikh riots. Now, I'll give you the figures. There was 10,000 Sikhs. This is the official record. Obviously, the unofficial record is a bit higher than this, a lot higher than this actually. 10,000 Sikhs are murdered brutally 3 days in Indian capital, where cantonment is just 10 kilometers away. Why was the army not sent? Why did
let me take that question to Mr. Stav.
Manpreet, I think the official figure in India for the cases which are going on in the court of law are that 3,000 innocent Sikhs were murdered.
As well.
Another thing is, in that particular episode, even the Bharatiya Janata Party and the RSS
Sajjan
were
Kumar, who was sentenced.
who have been
Sajjan Kumar, who was sentenced, there was a verdict came out against him. He's now in jail, right? But this is a statement from the High Court judge. He said the Indian law, the Indian constitution does not criminalize genocide as a crime. So even if I have to sentence him for genocide, I can't do it because it's not criminalized in Indian law. What are you saying? Are you trying to tell me now that after killing so much of my brothers and sisters, the justice has prevailed? No, it's not. No, it's not. After 30 years, If you send somebody in jail for 5 or 10 years, how good is that? How good is that? Only 1 or 2 persons. This is absolutely a crap story. If India takes the responsibility,
and if people have been involved in the act of murder,
they
they
should
will be
come up
definitely
in
hanged.
daylight and openly say, yes, it was genocide. Yes, it was a genocide. There is nothing less than we can accept it. They should invite United Nations. The United Nations should set up a trial court. We don't believe in Indian justice system. It has not prevailed since last 35 years.
I have to come in here and talk about another issue. I'm fast running out of time, which is about the Ayodhya thing. This was Supreme Court had appointed an arbitration panel also to mediate in the case, but it failed to arrive at a settlement. The right-wing Hindu leaders have continued to issue rhetorical statements claiming the site is theirs. There's this Hindu politician, Ram Vilas Vedanti, who has announced that there would be construction of the temple on the site starting December 6th. So very quickly, Mr. Srivastav, minorities seem to be under tremendous pressure, especially under this government.
Ejaz, you are absolutely right. I'm praying God with folded hands that the judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court should not be seen as a win for any particular group or party or Nirmohi Akhada or Ramlala or Waqf Board. It should be totally neutral, unbiased, and helping the people who have been petitioners over there. But in India, situation is very tense.
Mr. Srivastav, here's the problem. So the Muslims mark this as Yom-e-Gham, the day of mourning, whereas the Hindu right-wing group celebrate it as Shaurya Divas, or the day of victory. And these are the assertions that have obviously stoked fears among the Muslim community. In fact, one of the channels actually quoted, a rickshaw driver. It was a Muslim rickshaw driver, and he said, and I quote from that report, "Given the politics of the country, I feel that it is better for us to accept that even if we win the case, we will never be able to build a mosque there." Now, this is the kind of sentiment that the minorities are expressing under this government.
I beg to differ with you, Ejaz, that in India, we are a democratic country and that kind of a thing will not happen. Whatever Honorable Supreme Court decides will prevail, and the Prime Minister of this country, Narendra Modi,
Mr. Srivastav, the Supreme Court of India is on record as having judicially murdered Afzal Guru by saying that they were looking at the national sentiment. These words are part of the Supreme Court of India's judgment. Supreme Court of India has been reticent about taking up the petitions that challenged the revocation of Article 370. But I have totally run out of time. Thank you so much for being with me. I will quickly go back to Hassan on this. Hassan, what do you have to say about this?
On Ayodhya, Ejaz, recapping, it's been a long history of the Ayodhya case. But, I think a lot of our viewers should know that the mosque was built in 1528 by Babur, the Mughal emperor. And only after 300 years, in 1853, did the first sort of communal violence around it come forward. Now that begs a question. I mean, why did it take 300 years for communal violence to start around this Ayodhya mosque issue? Later, from 1853, it took another 100 years before the first surreptitiously, statue of Ram was put inside the mosque, and that created a new sort of issue. And then cases were created by various groups. The Hindu Mahasabha was involved, the Vishwa Hindu Prasad was involved, and other groups. The Waqf Board, which originally was responsible for the mosque property, was involved, and we saw it culminating in the destruction of the mosque in 1992. The ruling elite right now in India, which is the BJP government, their elders and their previous generation of leaders, including L.K. Advani, Murli Manohar Joshi, Uma Bharti were all, there were criminal cases put against them for inciting.
Absolutely. Mr. Singh, a final word from you with reference to the minorities issue in India that I've just raised with the other panelists.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to touch up very shortly on this because we've spoken about this. I think this needs to be a separate program for this. I mean, what is happening with Kashmiris? What is happening with the Sikhs? My friend said justice is prevailing. 3 of our Sikh community boys were just arrested because they had some religious books with them. And there had been a case of sedition filed against them. We went to UN for this as well. What I mean to say is this is a complete joke. The dismantling of the mandir of the so-called low-caste minority, what they say, Dalits, basically.
Yeah.
This has happened recently. What's happened in Kashmir, what's happening with Sikhs, there is only one way.
So there is a certain kind of a prayer. Thank you so much, Mr. Manpreet Singh, General Secretary, World Sikh Parliament, for speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss NATO's future. The alliance celebrates its 70th anniversary next month in London. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. NATO will celebrate the 70th anniversary of its founding in London next month. Where does the alliance stand now? Before the election of US President Donald Trump, no one would have asked this question in earnest, but Trump's mercurial unilateralism and his often denigrating statements about the European alliance partners not pulling their weight has arguably put a lot of stress on NATO. French President Emmanuel Macron has gone to the extent of saying that NATO is brain dead. In an interview to The Economist, he cited the US failure to consult NATO before pulling forces out of northern Syria and also questioned whether NATO was still committed to collective defense. France has a history there. Back in 1966, General de Gaulle felt that NATO was dominated by the United States and Britain, and he wanted France, while remaining a member of NATO, to have greater independence. France withdrew its forces from the NATO command. That's when NATO headquarters were shifted to Brussels, but remained a political partner and also remained committed to collective defense in then West Germany. It was President Nicolas Sarkozy who announced in 2009 that France will rejoin NATO's integrated military command. Meanwhile, Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel has said that she disagrees with Mr. Macron's, what she said, drastic words. Germany has also said that it will reach a NATO defense spending target by 2031, missing a 2024 deadline agreed by the allies who are under heavy US pressure to beef up their military budgets. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Thursday in Leipzig that he thinks NATO remains an important, critical, perhaps historically one of the most critical strategic partnerships in all of recorded history. He was speaking at a press conference with German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas. Maas added for good measure that he didn't think NATO was brain dead. To discuss the relevance of NATO as the alliance moves forward, we are joined by Micheal Springmann, who is a career Foreign Service officer and now practices law, joins us from Washington, D.C. Mark Sleboda, who's an IR and security analyst, and our correspondent, Elena Casas, who's based in Paris. Let me begin with Elena there. Elena, what do you think is happening there? What is the future of NATO?
Well, I think from Emmanuel Macron's point of view, we know that he's been frustrated for some time by what he sees as the US's lack of commitment to the alliance. He did say in this astonishingly candid interview to The Economist that he no longer knows if he believes in the principle of collective defense, that an attack on one NATO country is an attack on all, because the US has shown so little commitment since the beginning of the Trump administration. And certainly for Macron, it seems that this mounting frustration that he had has really crystallized after the US decision to pull its troops out of northern Syria and allow Turkey, which is of course also a NATO member, to carry out what President Macron described as an unannounced aggression in that country. Now, we know also that President Macron believes that Europe needs to take more responsibility for its own defense outside of NATO, precisely because of this lack of American commitment. So President Macron is the biggest advocate for the idea of a European army, of the European Union creating its own defence force. That isn't a wildly popular idea in other countries, so it's probably unlikely to happen, but it's certainly something that President Macron wants to push. He wants European countries to have their own defence initiatives outside of NATO, but it is remarkable, even though we know that's what he thinks, that he should use such blunt language in talking about NATO to The Economist now.
Okay, this is very interesting. Give me a sense of whether what he said about NATO is only about NATO. Is it also because of various other policies that President Trump has pursued, including the climate policy, the Paris Accord that the U.S. is walking back on, and other initiatives that President Trump has taken, which haven't really got the allies in? He never read in the allies. It seems to be a cumulative impact. Would you agree with that?
Of course it is. You might remember back when Trump first became president 2 years ago, Emmanuel Macron really went out of his way to try and build a strong relationship with him. He was known in some circles as the Trump whisperer because he was seen to have some kind of influence with the notoriously difficult US president on a number of issues. But he's found out essentially that despite having worked very hard at trying to build a relationship with Donald Trump, trying to impress him with things like inviting him here to Paris to the 14th of July military parade, for example, which Trump certainly seems to have enjoyed so much he wanted to replicate it in the US. Despite all of that effort, Emmanuel Macron is seeing that his diplomatic overtures are going nowhere. Donald Trump is continuing to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, for example, as you said there, which is a huge foreign policy priority for Macron. The Trump administration is imposing tariffs on EU countries, we discovered last week, in retaliation to a WTO ruling about Airbus, which is a huge problem for a number of French exporters in key sectors like Airbus, of course, the aeroplane manufacturer, but also sectors like cheese and wine, which are key to the French economy. So President Macron is seeing that he's tried hard with Trump, he's getting nowhere with a friendly approach, so he's obviously opting for a blunter one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martha. That was Elena Casas speaking with us on this issue. Let me go straight to Mr. Springmann there. Mr. Springmann, as I said in my opening, before President Trump's election, no one would have really seriously, questioned whether NATO is going to stay or whether, some of the allies are going to say that NATO is probably no more committed to collective defense. But since the advent on the scene of Mr. Trump, these questions have become relevant. Do you think that this is Trump specific, or do you think there is a thinking happening in Europe with reference to NATO?
Well, in my view, it's a little bit of both. And the principal issue is not how much money is going to be funded for NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, by the Europeans, by the Americans, and so on. I think everyone is missing the main issue, which is that NATO, which began in 1949 as a defensive alliance against the then Soviet Union, and its client states in Central Europe, such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, has now become an offensive alliance and has been used to destroy Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. And it has become an offensive alliance, and nobody seems to question this. Nobody seems to say, well, the Warsaw Pact, which was a response to NATO, with the old Soviet Union and its client states, was dissolved in 1991. Now, what is NATO doing? What is NATO protecting against when its members destroyed Libya, when its members are rampaging through northeast Syria? And nobody questions this except Macron, who says, oh, it's terrible. The Americans, who he omitted to say illegally and unconstitutionally invaded Syria, are now thinking about taking some of their soldiers out of Syria.
That's a very interesting approach, Mr. Springmann. Am I correct in assuming that you actually questioning the very existence of NATO post the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact?
Exactly. I won't say that they forced the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. I think that the Soviet Union and its client states realized that the world had changed, that the government in the Soviet Union has now become the Russian Federation, and that there is no need to have an alliance against NATO. And the significant thing, which has been omitted from all of Macron's statements, was that George H.W. Bush promised the Russian Federation that NATO would not expand 1 inch, as he said, 2.5 centimeters, towards the Russian border. And in fact, what NATO has done is acquired the Baltic states, Poland, Hungary, Czechia, and a few other countries, and has advanced up to the very doors of Russia. So I think that we really got to look at NATO and see how dangerous an organization has become.
Well, so there's the issue of NATO expansion, obviously. There's also the issue of the Partnership for Peace program. But there have been, since you mentioned Iraq and Syria and the rest of it, people have been questioning, I mean, looking at the NATO charter, that NATO is now operating outside of the area of operations.
Exactly right. And this has, that's eating up money, it's eating up time, it's eating up soldiers. And these are funds that can be put to better use, such as stopping the migration of people from all over the world into Europe. It could be used to repair bridges and highways and water lines in the United States, where, for example, in Flint, Michigan, they were pumping lead into the drinking water because of bad practices in running their water plants. So there's a lot of.
But here's the thing, since you talked about about the refugees and all of that. Now the issue is that if NATO goes into the greater Middle East area and start destroying countries, then refugees will swarm towards Europe. I mean, that's the natural consequence of military operations by NATO.
Well, exactly right. The Americans and NATO and their operations in North Africa and the Middle East have destroyed countries, dehoused their people, deculturalized their people, and with the help of their intelligence services are guiding them out of the Middle East to weaken the area and push them into Europe, to weaken the connection between Europe and Russia. I think the Americans fear a closer connection between the German know-how and Russian resources. And I think that also the Americans believe that a unified Europe will be a threat to the United States economically and politically.
Okay. Let me pull in Mark Sleboda. Mr. Sleboda, you joining us from Moscow. What is the thinking in Moscow with reference to NATO, and what do you think of President Macron's statement that NATO is brain dead?
Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova enjoyed a little bit of trolling back at NATO when she said she agreed completely with Macron's statement about the brain death of NATO. And she further, of course, called into question its purpose and its existence. And it's no secret that Russia regards NATO as an expansive and aggressive military alliance, the most aggressive military alliance on the planet, and feels that it is a national security threat to Russia. Really, I think Russia is become kind of an expert in dividing up the difference in opinion between European countries and the United States, and finding fault there, and more recently with Turkey as well. And in Syria, we have a rather interesting confliction where NATO members, absent an actual NATO mission, there is no official NATO mission in Syria, but NATO members have invaded and militarily occupied East Syria. And then a second NATO member, Turkey, has invaded that invasion. And that leaves the alliance in a rather difficult position of strategic conflict with members of its own organization. And I think that is a far more fundamental threat to NATO's going forward than the blip that is Donald Trump, who will most likely not be returned to office in 2020. And even if he is, that's another 4 years. There is literally no one else in the halls of power, whether it's in the deep state or in either parties of Congress, that agree with Trump's views of NATO. And NATO has become, it is not a collective security defense organization, as your last speaker says. It is an offensive organization. It is the vehicle, the political justification for U.S.-led global hegemony.
US-led global hegemony. That was Mark Sleboda speaking with. Before I wrap up, let me go back to Mr. Springmann. Mr. Springmann, structural realists, as you know, talk about the securities trap. Graham Allison did an entire, ran a program at Harvard, came up with a book. Obviously, he's looking at China, but there's also Russia. And as Mr. Sleboda said, Russia is now increasingly becoming really good at, dividing NATO members. But the question is that if Russia feels a threat from NATO, which, as you said, and Mr. Sleboda agrees with that, has become an offensive alliance, then Russia will do whatever it can to try and respond. And so, once again, we get into that trap.
Oh, exactly. The NATO is pushing hard against Russia. They've had these military operations in the past called Operation Dragoon Ride, which sent columns of American and other soldiers by the thousands through what used to be the Warsaw Pact states, riding around the borders of Russia, from Czechia all the way up to the Baltic states and back again. And this threatens the risk of war. You have one mistake by one overeager soldier, and suddenly you have a war going on. And I think the Russians are quite right in recognizing NATO as an offensive alliance, and that is directed against Russia, and that Russia will strengthen itself. And so far, Putin and the Russian government have played an excellent game of this, if you can call it a game, by resisting, by speaking out, and by pointing out what NATO is and what it says it does and what it actually does. And therefore, they have been very, very restrained in their reactions to provocative activities by NATO. So I think for the near term and long term, I think the Russians are going to consider NATO as a major threat and will react accordingly.
Okay, thank you so much. That was Micheal Springmann speaking with us. This is all for this week from Indus Special. We shall see you next week at the same time. Meanwhile, for latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.